Well, thank you, Colin, for agreeing to be interviewed about your prestigious career. It's very much appreciated.
Pleasure.
I wanted to start off by asking you why you wanted to get into the film business in the first place, and how did you kind of go about this desire?
I was almost almost destined to end up in the film industry, especially via Shepperton Studios. To explain that, I first entered Shepperton Studios at the age of 11. How that came about was that my mother was a telephone operator for what was then London Films, which was Sir Alexander Corder's company, and they owned Shepperton Studios. And my mother being an employee, that's how that came about. The company was called British Lion, and every Christmas British Lion put on a children's Christmas party for the people who worked for them. So that's how I came to go to Shepperton Studios to the Christmas party at the age of 11. Time passes by, go through school, ended school, didn't enjoy school very much, and then came to the time to decide what I was going to do in the future. My mother was still working for a film company at the time of me leaving. There was an editor working for that company who was leaving to join Pearl and Dean, the screen advertisers. And he said, well, would Colin like to come with us? I'm joining this new company, would he like to come and maybe join as a runner? So she put it to me and she explained the situation. Working on commercials, for a young boy didn't really appeal much. But then she explained it was the animation part of Pearl and Dean. So that sounded a little bit more interesting. Long story short, he joined the company, I joined 1 month later as a runner, but based in the editing department of Pearl and Dean. I was a runner for 6 months, which the company then said, well, would you like to stay with us? We're quite happy with your work. And you stay on then as a trainee sound editor, trainee editor, sorry. So that suited me fine. So I stayed with them for 3 years, 3 very happy years. Working in the animation department, I got to meet some wonderful, talented art directors and artists and painters and all the like, which was very encouraging. Let me see, I was there 3 years. Came holiday time 1 year, went off on holiday, came back, and mother said, I'm afraid you've been fired. And she said, but don't take it personally, it worked out that the whole department had been fired due to internal politics within the company. So during the time I was employed there, I was obliged to join the union. So having got a union ticket, I went to the unions, I was crying, oh, I'm unemployed, can you help me, I want a job? And they said, well, we've got nothing at the moment, but we'll let you know if something comes up. So I then went home, and I was sitting at home for about a month, and the phone rang, and it was the union saying, we've got a commercials company looking for a 1 month holiday fill-in while an assistant goes on holiday. Would you be interested? I said, well, I will take anything. I said, where is it? They said, it's a company called Anglo-Scottish, and they're based at Shepperton Studios. So they arranged for me to go out. So I went to the studio and I was interviewed, and the interview went well. They commissioned me to join them for a month summer fill-in. I was there for 3 years, working with various editors, working on the commercials. But being in Shepton Studios was absolutely wonderful because I got to see and meet people working on real films. So I was there for 3 very happy years. And one day I got a phone call out of the blue from a guy working in the studio. He said his name was Don Deacon and he was a dialogue editor, and he was due to start on a feature film and he needed an assistant and would I be interested. And of course that took me completely by surprise. I mean, I'd been up to that time permanently employed since leaving school. So the idea of suddenly becoming freelance was a bit of a shaker. So anyway, I came home and talked to Cynthia, my wife, and said, we've been offered this, that and the other. So after much heated debate, it was decided that I would take the gamble. So I left Anglo-Scottish and joined Don Deacon on this film called The Valiant, a film starring John Mills, a war story in the Navy where a British battleship was sunk in harbour by Italian frogmen. A most enjoyable picture, and that then started me off working on feature films. I was then with Don for 3 years working on different films coming into Shepton, so which was absolutely great fun. One of the films we worked on was Carl Foreman's The Victors, a huge great war story that Carl wrote and directed with an all-star cast. A most enjoyable experience working on that film. When the film finished, Carl offered Don the chance to be an editor on Born Free, to be filmed in Africa. Unfortunately, for union reasons, he wasn't allowed to take an English assistant. He had to take a South African assistant. So that caused a split between Don and myself. So that put me back on the market again. And then, by then I'd got to know quite a few people within the film industry. And I'd been home, I suppose, about 3 weeks, and I got a phone call saying there's a sound editor working at Shepton Studios who wanted an assistant. Will I go along for an interview? So I went along and met this wonderful guy who I'd heard about called Archie Ludsky, and he wanted an assistant on this film. The interview went well, and I joined Archie. I was then with Archie for 3 years again. There seems to be a pattern here developing, but I'm with him for 3 years. So that worked out fine, but then Archie had to go off and do something else, so that put me back on the market. So then I worked with various, tending to be more on the sound side. I also did picture first assisting, as well as being a sound editor, but my bent was towards sound editing. I felt I was sort of more at home doing that. So I'd worked with various dialogue editors, sound effects editors, and Foley editors, learning an awful lot about all those 3 categories. I was working with Archie. Once again, Archie came back to do another film called Cartoon, and he asked me to join him just on that run. And as we were coming to the end of Cartoon, Archie said, would you like to be a sound editor on the new Carry On film that was being shot? And I, once again, was taken completely by surprise. The idea of me becoming a sound editor when there was so many experienced sound editors out there But I thought, well, I need a break at some time. So I went for the interview to be the sound editor on the Carry On Up the Khyber. The interview went well, and I was taken on to work with this wonderful editor by the name of Alfie Room. Now, Alfie came from a very privileged family. He used to edit films purely as a hobby, not because of the money. It's certainly in the case of Carry-Ons, because Carry-Ons were not known for their salaries, as I soon discovered when it came to do my deal. But they were prepared to give me the break, so I was prepared to take the money. I thoroughly enjoyed working on the Carry-Ons. They were a wonderful group of people to work with. And Gerald Thomas, the director, was very, very nice. And of course, the first challenge for me was when we went into the dubbing theatre for the very first time to look at the first reel that I'd prepared. That was a nervous time because you never know whether it's acceptable. Because, with the Carry-Ons you can take certain liberties to a degree with some of the sounds and some of the things you do. Anyway, he saw the first reel and it went down fine. He saw the second reel and that was fine. So from there on in, the die was cast, I was accepted and finished off the movie. I then went off to do other jobs, working sound editing or helping other sound editors on other productions. About 18 months, 2 years later, the next Carry On was being made. They asked me to go back, and I did. In all, I did 4 Carry On movies. And each time, once again, as I say, a most enjoyable experience. And that was my launch pad into the career which took me the next 40 years.
I suppose, because might be also like the Bond films.
Yes.
So we didn't have an idea that the Carry On films would have this huge life that they obviously have enjoyed, and they're always on TV, aren't they? So every Sunday afternoon. So,
oh yes, they're a staple of Sunday afternoon viewing.
Did you get a sense at the time that these were films that were kind of going to sort of be, that would last?
I guess so, because the English humour has a certain longevity to it, and when hearing people's feedback, people always talk fondly of Carry-Ons with great fondness because they were so enjoyable. There was nothing heavy about them. And they were universally accepted for what they were. I mean, I'm sure there are many producers and directors today who would love the cost-profit ratio that the Carry-Ons carried.
I think a lot of people didn't, as you alluded to, people didn't realise perhaps how cheaply they were produced. And,
yes.
Even the stars,
yes.
A lot of them were not sort of hugely wealthy because the paychecks were relatively small. And of course, things like Carry On the Khyber,
yes.
you've got, it's mostly primary backlot, it's glamorous Wales.
I'm one of the first Carry-Ons to go on location rather than shooting in the studio or the backlot. Yeah. And yes, they said they shot in, I believe, in I think it's the Brecon Beacons in Wales. If I may, there's an interesting story with regard to having to record some of the audio, because at the time, time of shooting, the sound wasn't acceptable for technical reasons. And on Carry On Up the Khyber, there was a sequence with Joan Sims and Barbara Windsor, and we needed to re-record some dialogue. So I went to the office and said, look, I need them to do some recording. So the office said, well, go and find them and find out when they're available to go into the recording studio with you. So it just so happened that I was walking from the editing department into the main building at Pinewood Studios. It was just at the end of lunchtime. Barbara and Joan Sims came out arm in arm together, and I approached them and said, "Good afternoon, ladies. My name is Colin Miller. I'm the sound editor on the film, and I'm wondering if you can make yourself available for recording." And Barbara, in her wonderful old Cockney accent, said, "Oh, not now, darling. We're both pissed." And both of them burst into laughter and went tottering back to set on their high heels. And that was one of the wonderful experiences of working with them. But needless to say, we did the job properly eventually. And every one of them was so professional. They really were, when it came to it.
Do you remember encountering Sid James or Charles Hawtrey?
There is another story with regard, well, yes, Sid James is wonderful. Let me think now. I've got to be careful what I say or don't say here. There's a similar scenario with Kenneth Williams. Now, a lot of people knew about Kenneth Williams and his predilections. All I will say is that when I asked Kenneth Williams, can he make himself available for recording, he propositioned me. Which was kind of embarrassing, but we managed to overcome that embarrassing scenario, or I did. I'm sure it's almost an arena event for him, but lovely man anyway to work with.
Well, a nice compliment though, isn't it?
Yes. That's one way of looking at it, I suppose.
And Charles Hawtrey, did you...
Charles, yes. Very nervous gentleman, totally unsure of himself, but he just came in, said the words, went away. There was no rapport between us. I mean, such is the nature of the man. But all the others absolutely fine.
So obviously vivid memories of Kenneth Williams and Charles, but Sid James, did you encounter much of?
Sid was wonderful. I was talking to Jerry one day and I was saying that I'm going to book a holiday. I think it was to Mallorca. He said, "Oh, go and talk to Sid. I think he's got a place out in Mallorca." So I went on the set and sat down with Sid and said, I'm going on holiday to Mallorca and sort of, can you give me some tips? And for the next 45 minutes he was telling me all about Mallorca. And he was talking to a mate. He wasn't talking to a fellow technician. I was just another mate as far as he was concerned, which was very nice to be treated in that way.
Oh yeah, so you do hear from stars that won't necessarily talk to the crew, and obviously he was not one of them.
We get good ones, we get bad ones. I've had a few of the bad ones as well.
I suppose like any industry in life, it's always going to be good and bad.
Exactly.
Did you ever meet Peter Rogers, producer?
Oh, very much so, yes. Yeah. Because at the end of a dubbing mix, we would run the final film, for Peter to come in and view and to give his notes about what he would like changed or added or taken away. But he came in, saw the film, gave us the few notes and walked out again, and that was it. He was happy with the final product. But Peter did, unlike Jerry, Peter didn't really engage much with the technicians.
Right. I suppose producers have to keep an idea on the whole picture, so therefore they're perhaps not spend too much time with individual departments. Of course, does the theme of the material determine how you might approach sound effects? For example, working in comedies, is a different approach to it?
It's questions of where you can take the liberties. I mean, some of them were a little bit extreme. I mean, I played a few tricks which were sort of not exactly frowned upon, but I don't think they're for this film. But one that did get through was in the in Khyber, when they were being attacked by the tribe. Terry Scott manned the machine gun and sort of turned the handle, but instead of bang, 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 I put a barrel organ effect in, and that stayed in the film and raised a few laughs. So that was the kind of things that you could take liberties with and get away with, because it was a carry-on. Anything was acceptable.
So you had a bit of freedom in terms of the sound. Everything was
they gave you total freedom, and if they didn't like it, they let you know, or said, can you put something else? But that didn't happen very often. Excuse me, I'm glad to say.
I suppose there is a bit of a responsibility in terms of, because the films were produced on a shoestring, and you had to sell these very exotic locations to make everything seem a bit bigger than it was. Again, was that something you had to approach?
Carrying up the jungle, creating the jungle atmospheres, and the wild animals off screen that you never see, and the insects in the night. So these are the kind of liberties not liberties, but the way I look at it is that the director, in conjunction with the editor, put together this audio-visual jigsaw or picture, and it is my job to put the best sound frame I can around this picture. So that's the way I analyse my job.
And do you have a favourite of the 4 carry-ons?
Khyber, I think, because it's been voted the most successful carry-on ever. So I'm proud of that, and I thoroughly enjoyed Carrying Up the Jungle.
Yeah, I think they're two of my favourites. Probably the Carry On Cleo. They're kind of sort of the 3 best. I would say. So just moving ahead a little bit. I want to ask you about The Man Who Fell to Earth, whether that was memorable.
It certainly was. Working with Nick Rogue, the director. I felt privileged to work with Nick, because he came with this huge reputation, and to be associated with Nick, that film, with David Bowie, I mean, what could be better? And it was wonderful working with Nick, in as much that we had a wonderful editor by the name of Graham. It'll come to me.
Clifford?
Graham Clifford, well done, thank you.
I'm interviewing Graham in a couple of weeks' time, that's why.
No!
Yes, I've located him.
Right,
yes.
I'll talk to you about that later.
Okay, yeah.
And Nick was heavily involved with Graham in the editing, because it took its own style. It's the best way I can describe it. And to try, I was the dialogue editor on that, not the sound effects editor. But the challenge is that sort of smoothing out the dialogue problems that we had on that film. And there was a big sequence involving a scene with a lot of reporters, and we had to bring in revoice artists to do voices for the reporters, and they all had to overlap in a certain way. And Nick wanted, this question at this point, that question, and a response, and it was like building a ladder from the top, and it grew outwards with all this dialogue overlapping down and down and down, until we created this wonderful aura of these reporters doing their job. And that was challenging, and I'm glad to say it worked out very well. Nick was very pleased with that. I was due to go to America to record the post-sync ADR with David, but they said I could send the material out to be done, but it had to be done by an American editor over there for union reasons, as I'm told. So anyway, but the material came back, and I then adjusted it where necessary, and we finally finished the film. And what was nice about that was that Graham used a lot of Pink Floyd's music during him creating the scenes, and he timed a lot of the cutting around the music itself, and it worked extremely well. But I think there was great controversy about it being used in the final version purely because of cost. And I can't remember if we did use part of it in the final or not.
So would you have encountered people like Rip Torn and Bernie Casey, or they wouldn't really have been something that you would have been involved with?
No, as luck would have it, they were, if done at all, they were done in the States, because that's where they were housed at the time.
I was quite interested in your thoughts about the director, because he did some additional photography on Casino Royale, the David Niven version, and obviously that's a film close to my heart. So from what you're describing, Nicholas was one of those really nice directors to work with.
Yes.
So I wanted to mention, so then of course Bond starts to come into your life. I just wanted to know how that kind of came about, really. How did Bond come knocking?
Working on some other films, I came to work with a wonderful dialogue editor. He was known only for doing dialogues, not effects, by name Derek Holding. Now Derek and I did, I was doing effects, Derek was doing the dialogues on about 2 or 3 pictures. The Spy Who Loved Me was being made at the time. Derek was then contacted about to be dialogue editor on The Spy Who Loved Me. He joined the supervising sound editor, a wonderful guy by the name of Alan Soanes. They needed another sound effects editor on the film, and Derek was kind enough to put my name forward to Alan. I'd known of Alan but never worked with him. So I went for an interview, and as luck would have it, John Glenn, was the editor on the film, and I'd worked with John many years prior, in my early days at Shepton, when John was cutting a TV show called Man of the World. So we'd known each other then. So he was quite happy that I was joining the Bond crew. But I was unknown to the Bond organisation. But anyway, we set about doing our work on that. And because of the nature of the movie, and the ship, the La Paris, and the underwater compound of our villain, we wanted to create some certain specialised sound effects. So we talked to the associate producer, who I think then was Bill Kirkledge, and he knew of a guy who'd got gizmos and the like, and worked at a studio in London. So we went off to this studio, and we explained to this guy, I think it was a synthesizer of some kind. We explained what we wanted, that we had special air doors, that we didn't want just a hiss and a bang, we wanted somebody to colour that kind of thing. So we went through various effects for various reasons and various atmospheres to enhance the visual. And so we got a lot of material there, went back and applied it to the film, and as luck was have it, it all worked out very, very well. So that put me in good stead with the Carry On, that put me in good stead with the Bond people, which then almost guaranteed me a future with them as and when required.
You get a foot in the door and then suddenly it's
exactly.
jobbing sort of.
I mean, not that there's ever a guarantee in anything like that, but as I said, I'd kept my nose clean and delivered, so there was a good chance that it would happen in the future.
Yeah. It's much like we would say Carry On sound effects, is there a different approach to Bond because it's again larger than life?
Yes.
Is there something that particularly makes a Bond effect versus?
There are certain themes within a Bond movies. There's nearly always the same gunshots. Whenever there's battles and people are dying, we've always got the same screams.
Yes.
Time and time again, Bond film after Bond film after Bond film. There's the same explosions we use. We were somewhat limited in those days. We don't have the vast array to draw upon like you can these days. And certain things in Q's workshop were similar but not identical. We were able to sort of amend them a little bit.
Yeah. So we're using the sound effects partly it's a necessity.
Yes.
Yes.
There's an accepted degree of what we use. Yeah. Which went down well.
And I think even some more modern films, I think sometimes use the same effects. So whether that is again a practical element, or whether there's kind of sort of like a little bit of an in-joke, or this sort of.
Yes, there are certain in-jokes. There are certain in-jokes, visual as well as sound.
So was there any sort of in-jokes that you sort of did deliberately, thinking, oh, this is a nice homage to this or that?
Ooh. Well, I wouldn't credit myself with it, but the doorbell into the laboratory was from Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh, in
Moonraker. Bing.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if that came from me or it was already thought of. So I can't claim credit for it, but that was an accepted.
Yes, that's a nice one, isn't it? I think also
yes.
In For Your Eyes Only, I think there's a door code that Q starts and Bond finishes, and so nobody does it better.
Yes.
So yes, it's nice little in-jokes. Is there anything further you'd like to talk about Spy Love Me before we move on to another film?
Well, of course, the big thing was the tanker and the underwater layer. They presented the big shootout in that huge great hangar, but that stage was built expressly for the two-man submarine scenes. So that huge great battle that took place in the hangar and the submarines, trying to leave the hangar with the doors opening and the sub trying to get out and scraping along the side and of the ship. So that was a bit of a challenge, but it worked out okay.
It's a real feast of sound, isn't it?
Yes.
And
yes.
visuals.
But of course, from the sound effects, our big battle is always with the music.
Yeah.
And in many cases, they say, well, we've paid more for the music than we've paid for you for the sound effects, so let's go with the music.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about the relationship between the sound effects and the composers, and whether there is much of a sort of dialogue between them, or whether it's completely separate.
No, they each do their own thing.
Yeah.
And then we battle it out in the theatre.
Yeah.
what works best. In many cases both work together, but it's not always the case.
No, I think the secret, I think, for a composer is to know what not to score as much as what to score, and I think there's certain bits where sound effects can take over, and then probably it starts to build a bit. That's when you probably bring the music in.
If I can just say that sort of during the production of the Bonds, the sound editors were taken on earlier than normal, than most films, on the basis that as soon as the editor, John Grover, John Glenn, Peter Davis, as soon as a sequence was cut, it was given to us to do a temp dub on. Put some gunshots in, put some atmosphere, put some tyre skids, anything to just enhance that scene. So by the time the film is finally shot and it's got the final assembly, there's every chance that about 80% of the film has already got a temp dub in it. And that gave us a guide, because many times if we've established that the sound effects worked, they can adjust the timing of the edit. That gunshot and that reaction, we can afford to lose a couple of frames here, or we need to add a few frames for it to work effectively. So in many cases, by the time we have the first assembly of the film, as I say, that we have a temp dub, but we then go and do a bit better temp dub to show to the producers in America. So the film is almost semi-dubbed at a very early stage. And because the composer would come in and he would see the film and he could see what we have done with sound effects, so he knew where not to conflict or where he felt he could enhance a particular scenario.
And you need to be that far ahead, because of course Bonds always have release dates.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
As soon as day one of shooting was set, the premiere was set.
Yeah. Were one or two of the films more of a rush to get done, or was it kind of all fairly?
No, it's fairly well controlled.
Moving on to Moonraker,
Yes.
quite as even more of a visual film than The Spy Who Loved Me, and of course you have a sci-fi element cropping in
Exactly.
as well. Again, how did you find that bit of a challenge?
Challenging is challenging and most satisfactory for me, in as much that we had all the earthly effects to take control, but having a space scene takes on a whole new challenge altogether. Excuse me. And of course the big one was the laser cannons, pistols, rifles, whatever, and trying to find something for that would be acceptable to everybody. So once again we went to the office and said, look, we needed to find a specialist somewhere who can come up with something for this. So long story short, we found a guy once again, I think with a synthesizer, and we brought him down to the studio, and we were able to show him sort of a rough cut of these laser guns and rifles and cannons. And we arranged to go to a recording studio, and we then sat down and we then started playing around with sounds, and eventually we sort of narrowed it down and down and down. Okay, so that would be good for the laser cannon, that would be good for the laser rifle, just changing the EQ and the frequencies of things. And so we came away with a bundle of sound effects for each one. We then had to give these sound effects to an associate of mine who was brought on exclusively to fit all these, what would be gunshots, in these cases laser shots. But of course it's bang, 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 but so each one had to be fitted individually. So the poor sound editor, he had a huge task on his hands, fitting every one of these. And of course we kept on getting replacement shots where they've enhanced or added more guns, so he's constantly going back and adding or taking away or adjusting all these multiple laser shots. But anyway, it worked out. So the whole space scenario, up to then we'd been working on earlier Bonds in 10-minute reels, but in Moonraker we were working in 20-minute reels. So we dubbed the whole 20 minutes of this particular sequence, which involved the space station. Now, this was worrying in as much that Cubby hadn't seen any of this. Lewis Gilbert, the director, hadn't seen any of this. So suddenly presenting them with this very busy battle with everything to go with it was a little bit worrying. So they kept both Cubby and Lewis came in and they sat down and said, okay, run the reel. And the lights went down. And for the next 20 minutes, I was on tenterhooks. The lights go up at the end, and Lewis, bless him, says, that's the best damn sequence I've ever seen. So, and Cubby smiled, everybody was happy and walked out. So that was a huge relief that these challenges were met and delivered.
Because it was a huge sequence in itself, with all the film had to be round back on the camera to shoot all the threads. Right. And I think when I spoke to John Glover, he was saying that the amount of film on that was
huge,
significantly bigger than any other Bonds.
Yes,
just sort of
the amount of coverage.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned Lewis Gilbert. What was he like as a director?
Lewis was happy because he had a very good editor, and they'd worked together before. So Lewis was very happy. If John was happy, he was happy. And Lewis, I wouldn't say easy to please, but he was.
And I take it all of your work on Moonraker was done back in England. You didn't go to.
Oh, at Pinewood.
Yeah, you did.
Pinewood.
Yeah,
but that said, as you probably know, the film a lot of it was shot in Paris. And as I was saying earlier, as soon as the sequence was edited, a sequence, they were cutting in Paris. The sequence would be sent back to us. We would prep it and do a temp mix, and Alan and I would go over to Paris for the day, take the sequences that we've done a temp mix on, show it to them and get the necessary adjustments or whatever, and then bring the next sequences which were ready to have a temp done on. And this went on for about 4 or 5 weeks, I suppose, going over day trips and whatever. And our final trip over happened to coincide with the rap party in Paris. The company had taken over Regine's nightclub in Paris for the rap party. Now, Regine's nightclub in those days was the nightclub in Paris at that time. So the company took it over, and we had this wonderful rap party at Regine's nightclub. Champagne and wonderful food was absolutely amazing. So Alan and I then returned back to Pinewood, and 1 week later the Pinewood Pinewood shooting party took place, so we were able to attend that one as well. So that was good fun.
So Alan was you kind of like...
He was the supervisor. We became co-supervising sound editors.
Yeah. So what's his surname, sorry?
Alan Soanes.
Alan Soanes. Did you get to see any of the Bond sets, for example, the Tankers?
Oh yes, we were often going up there to see what was happening.
Yeah. Quite memorable, I would have thought to see.
Well, it was awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
It really was.
Yeah.
To see that, and especially knowing that stage had been built, especially for that big scene.
Yeah, I think apart from say the volcano in twice, it was probably
one
of the biggest
sure.
sets we ever constructed. So I think the challenge of Moonraker probably was to make it sort of have a sci-fi element, but also keep it down to earth as well.
Yes.
That it is
Yeah.
science fact rather than say Star Wars.
Oh, very much
science fiction. So you're kind of making sure you're not going too
No.
far with things.
We couldn't take the liberty. You can.
Yeah. Is it nice to do sounds for the locations, so Rio
Yes.
or
Yes.
Egypt?
Yes. Yeah.
And again, you rely predominantly on library, but also stuff they film over there.
No, we relied a lot upon the sound libraries in those days.
Yeah.
There obviously certain stuff was shot, but time didn't always allow the sound unit to, it was on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. Where they could, they would grab something where they could, but we had to come up with it, or find it, or create it.
So you might maybe give them a list of, say, a wish list of stuff, but you're fully prepared that you're not able to have that.
By having the script in advance, we kind of knew roughly what we were going to need, but until we actually saw the sequences, that then defined what we actually needed.
Yeah. I suppose also, even if you do get the sounds that you wanted on location, perhaps for some reason they don't quite sound
correct.
So you might have to mix it perhaps with other.
Yes.
A lot of it perhaps mixing sounds.
In many cases, there was a lot of blending going on.
Yeah.
Original and enhancement.
I remember interviewing Norman Wanstall, who did the sound on the first 5
That's
Bonds,
right.
and he had a particular requirement. They were doing the end of the film in Scotland and the motorboats, and he said because Norman didn't go on location, he said, could you get some sounds of the motorboats? It was really helpful. And his assistant did it all very digitally, and was very, very happy with what he got. And when Norman went through it all sounded like high-end speedboats. It was all very clean. It wasn't sort of you want these sort of dirty.
Wanted motion.
Yeah, these dirty sort of diesel being used, things. So he ended up doing completely sort of library based in the end.
Yes.
And then, of course, Through Eyes Only is much more of a down-to-earth film. So, again, what maybe the highlights of being on Through Eyes Only?
In all honesty, I don't think there were all that many.
It was much more sort of a more, well, there's things pedestrian Bond.
No, I know what you mean.
More sort of realistic, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's. I mean, what I asked Norman this question in terms of what made a Bond sound, and he said, for example, an elevator is not what you would hear in Marks and Spencer's. It has to be something that maybe is a bit difficult to define, but there is definitely a Bond sound versus.
Yes. Well, as I say, it's every door was an electronic door inside you, and that was one of the sounds that went through most of the Bond movies. It was an accepted sound to use.
Yeah.
Maybe enhanced in some cases, but not always, but accepted as a basis.
I think one of the most impressive sequences in Through Eyes Only is probably the climbing sequence where Bond is kicked off the cliff, and you have the wonderful sound of the carabiners and the rope stretches.
Yes.
And things.
Yes.
So again,
that was a challenge. Yes. All the hammering of all the pitons into the rock face and the bird flying out.
Yeah.
It sort of as startled as everybody. And and being up in the mountains it just gave us fresh air really. It was very hard to enhance it in any way, shape or form.
I think it's quite brave as well, because that sequence is all done without music, so it is very much the sound and the suspense sort of coming through.
It was almost a case of less is more, if I may use that expression.
Oh yeah, I would agree. If you listen to the Bond sounds more recently, they don't, I think, sound as interesting as what you were doing and people like Norman were doing. They seem a bit more, they could almost belong to any kind of action film.
Yes. Ours was more organic, is the best way I can describe it.
Yeah. And so it's very much a specific style that even in future Bonds seems kind of to be a bit lost.
Well, what is nice is about all the challenges that the different Bonds present. I mean, in Octopussy, the aeroplane with the big engines, a lot of that was all shot mute. For obvious reasons, at the air-to-air stuff, you can't do that. But so that whole sequence was quite a challenge in it, from the time that the aircraft takes off to the time it crashes. So coming up with the requisite sound for that. Now that was a particular kind of aircraft with a particular kind of engine. And so I went to the office and said, look, we've got a problem here. Going to sound libraries, they don't have anything like what I need. So we had a talk, and the office found an almost identical aircraft somewhere down the M4 at this aircraft museum. I think it's Rawton, something like that. So with a sound recordist, we went down there to see this wonderful old aeroplane in the hangar there, and sure enough, the engines were perfect. So we couldn't actually fly the plane because it didn't have a certificate of airworthiness. So the obvious way to do it was to bring it out of the hangar, put it on the runway, and for us to be outside, get them to start it up, run the engines, and we would say, rev, drop it down, rev, drop it down, to simulate the movement of the plane flying and evading. And this worked out very well. The sound was absolutely fantastic. So then came the time to record it from the inside. So we climbed inside, and the pilot said, all right, we'll run it down the runway, but I'm not allowed to take off because, So we go through all the starting procedures and we say, okay, off we go. So he opens the throttle, we're roaring down the runway, and we're suddenly hit by a gust of wind and we suddenly take off. We flew into the air about 100 feet, and he then brought it down to earth again. So although we weren't supposed to, we did. But what we got was absolutely fine, and it worked out perfectly. Now, the only exception was the plane has to do all these very extreme manoeuvres. Now, we couldn't do that with what we were trying to simulate. But I remembered from the film It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, they had an almost identical plane. And I remember these wonderful Stuka type sounds that they had for their sequence. And I went to the offices and said, what are the chances of us seeing if we can get any of those sounds? And as luck would have it, I think it was an MGM picture. So they contacted the States. They contacted the sound editors who said, oh yes, we've got that sound in the vaults. So we contracted them to supply us, for them to supply us with all those Zoom noises. and they came and applied it to the film, and it worked absolutely perfectly. So that was an absolute bonus, and great fun to create.
Yes, it sounds wonderful. In terms of sound libraries, did you ever in the early days use the BBC Radiophonic Workshop at all?
Very rarely, very rarely. I know Norman did for...
certainly Goldfinger, there's a lot of...
yes.
And how you know is if you then watch some of the classic Doctor Who's, the black and white ones, you hear the sound of Fort Knox or the bomb ticking and stuff. So I think they were quite invaluable to Norman, I think, in those days, because they were the only people probably at that time that were doing the synthesizers and at that level.
Right.
I wanted just to touch on Wild Geese.
Can I just go back to a story with regard to For Your Eyes Only?
Oh yes, please. Yeah.
And the Section 2 CV.
Oh yes, yeah.
For anybody that knows, a Section 2 CV has a 600cc engine, 2-cylinder. For purpose of a Bond film, in a car chase, that's no good.
No.
So the car was re-engineered with, I believe, a Citroen GS 1220 Club engine to give it the speed which was required for the chase. The whole chase sequence with the villains was all shot mute because they couldn't spare a sound unit to do that. Through the countryside and whatever. So the plan was for me to re-record it and apply it to the picture. So went to the office, and the officer said, okay, well, we'll get the guy who engineered the car in the first place. He came to the editing department and we ran in the sequence and said, look, this is what we need to do. We need to speed up here, and they go fast, spin, turn, whatever. He said, okay, fine. He said, so the office then arranged that we could go to, I think it was an airfield near Bovingdon. So we turn up on this cold November but bright day in Bovingdon, and he turns up with the 2CV. So we have our list of what we need to do. Excuse me. He said, just before we start, he said, I decided just to check the car out last night before we do today's session. So I took it out of the studio and down onto the dual carriageway just to give it a burst. He said, so I went onto the dual carriageway. This was going down from Pinewood down to Slough. And he said, I came up behind this Ford Consul and I flashed him to overtake. The Consul put his foot down, so I put my foot down. I flashed him again, the guy put his foot down, and I put my foot down. And I overtook him doing 93 miles an hour and still accelerating. Because such was the power of this engine in this lightweight car. Yeah. So that made for a wonderful story. So we then set about doing all these wonderful recordings of up and past and sort of interior, exterior, skids, turns and everything. And then when applied to the final edit, worked out absolutely fine.
Yeah, I think it's one of the best unconventional sort of Bond chases that I think they've ever done. And there's even a little homage to it in the Mission Impossible film with a small little yellow car that Tom Cruise drives. So
yes.
It's obviously, even for 40 something years later, it's still left in impression. Just thinking of Your Eyes Only again, the underwater sequences when they are trying to recover the ATAC, and again, I think that's with all the bubbles and the shark going past. I think that's particularly effective.
Yes, but that's fairly straightforward, just with a few minor enhancements.
Because I know when I spoke to Norman that the challenge sometimes of creating sounds that are supposed to sound underwater, and of course you're not actually creating them underwater a lot of the time. So it's sort of what kind of techniques you use for.
And of course, where we had there was trying to do the drilling, and that was sort of we had to come up with an acceptable sound for the drilling on the hull there. So, but that was interesting. The different ways we could do that, but it worked. It worked.
Yeah. Do you sort of treat a sound effect to make it sound like it's underwater? Is there kind of like a little trick to it?
That was down to the dubbing mixers, how they treated that.
Yeah. I
had my idea, but what they did seemed to work well.
Yeah. So they did an enhancement on
exactly.
On it. Yeah. So. Were there any more highlights of Octopussy that you wanted to mention? Of course, you mentioned the plane sequence. I think there's so many good stuff. Certainly the planes at the beginning of the jet.
Yeah, the beady jet.
Beady jet, yes.
Yes, I was able to sort of get fairly conventional jet sounds for that. But I then had to sort of come up with things for the guided missile that was following it.
Yeah.
And I used sort of Roman candles, recordings of Roman candles and fireworks like that. Plus a few genuine guided missiles treated in such a way that we could take a large guided missile sound and thin it down to make it appropriate to the size of the missile that was chasing the beady jet.
Yeah, yeah. And another sequence that just comes to mind is the chase for the jungle, with Bond being essentially...
Yes, the tiger hunt.
Yes, tiger hunt. And I think quite famously the Tarzan sound effects of jumping, I assume that was probably scripted rather than saying...
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
It was always in there.
Yeah. And I think, again, works quite nicely in the moment.
Yes.
So just think about this safari scene. Was it nice to create sounds for the Indian location?
Yes, all the beaters and the elephants and the tiger roars. Yeah.
And again, because the tiger, I think, that comes out in Star Wars Bond is it's a stuffed tiger, isn't it?
Yes.
But again, the sound is what sort of
but
sounds it.
on the set, they had a real tiger, and it escaped briefly.
Yeah.
So that worried everybody, but the wrangler managed to get it back into its cage.
I suppose on some levels it's quite nice not to be on location because you don't have to deal with the heat or the spiders or the tigers. But would you have liked to have done a bit more?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
But like leaving the initial sound recorders to get on and record the dialogue, I'd like to have created the ambience, recorded the ambient sounds.
Yeah.
But hey, it worked in spite of that.
So when you were doing the assistant work back in Shepperton, that was on set, sort of, was it like assistant director. So was that your role, or was it kind of?
Well, no, I was in the editing department.
But still, yeah.
The editing department.
Yeah.
Just assisting the sound editor and his needs.
I mean, do you think it's? Well, one thing I will come on to is how the industry has changed, but certainly how to get into the industry. I imagine it would have been a very different path you're going into it now than when.
Well, you see, in those days, nearly every editor had an assistant, be it Foley editor, dialogue editor, sound effect editor, sometimes more than one assistant.
Yeah.
And this is where you learn your craft, because you're learning. This is where I learnt my craft. As luck would have it, I worked with some very good people in all those three categories. It's about that hard. It doesn't happen today. Youngsters have to come in via film schools or academies, and it's all on digital.
Yeah.
We were all on film. I mean, when I started, we were working on mono-optical. Right through to the digital age, with all those changes in the interim periods. Go from mono-optical to stereo and stereo variable area, into digital.
Mm. And although you were predominantly freelance for your career, of course there were a few years where you worked with staff, and I think Pinewood had, for example, Graham Hartson I was spoken to.
Yeah.
He was always sort of
Pinewood staff, yes.
But I take it that staff is a lot. It has gone towards more freelancers.
Yes.
And of course now we have the actors and writers strike that. And I think I was speaking to one person who, I think, a production bio, and he said that everyone in his department had just been told to go home. They were on freelance contracts, and they said,
yes,
not go home and wait. Go home. That's it.
Yes.
So of course he does a bit of work as a runner and other bits and pieces to keep him going. But it's a day here, a day there, and he doesn't know what's going to happen.
And a lot of people also moved over onto things they would never do, working on commercials. Because they don't have the same problem with this.
So there's ways around it.
Yes.
And because I understand that stunt crews, for example, are still going.
Yes.
But predominantly, I think Pinewood is basically shut down.
Yes.
Because although we think of it as an American issue, there's a lot of
support here. Yes.
Over here.
Yes.
So just to get away from Bond for a moment,
yes.
The Wild Geese.
Yes.
I wonder if that was particularly memorable.
Yes, it was. It was a very enjoyable picture. Once again, working with John Glenn and John Grover, Peter Davis. Wonderful cast with, as you know, with Richard Burton and Roger Moore and Harris. Richard Harris was going through one of his crazy phases at the time.
Right.
Came time to do some post-sync ADR recording in the theatre. We would just put a reel up and do the lines within the reel, and then changed to another reel and do the lines in that reel. In between reel changes, Richard Harris took it upon himself to practice his kung fu kicks towards my face.
Right.
But a most enjoyable picture, and a very successful one too. The number of people who say, "Oh, Wild Geese, I loved it." I think it's because it was a good old boys action adventure movie.
Yeah.
This is why it appealed to so many people. You know, there was no sex, no violence, and sort of just a good old story.
Yeah. And Andrew McLachlan was a great director as well.
Yes.
And a lot of Bond crossover in terms of career with John Glenn's second unit. And, I think sort of John Richardson and John Grover, for example, worked on that as well. So yes, we just finished off talking about Wild Geese.
Right.
And so I think that probably brings us on to, roughly chronology-wise, Labyrinth.
Oh, probably, as Vernon probably told you, the most enjoyable movie to work on. John started off on it, he put Vernon onto it to do the sound effects, and I came on to do the dialogues. Charming film. Jennifer Connelly and David Bowie, of course. The thing about that was, during the shooting, of course, Jim Henson's puppeteers were doing all the creatures, and they were just using their own voices and everything. So we had to replace the whole of the creatures, every one of them. So what happens in a case like that? There's a voice casting agent that I know, and we brought him in and explained the situation, and we then held a voice casting audition where we would bring people in and say, okay, we would like to do that devil there, and we'd like to do that snake there, and we'd like to do, And we tried all different people doing all these different characters until we formulated a team for a sequence or for the film. So every single creature in that film was a total revoice. That was a challenge in as much that the puppeteers did a very good job trying to move the mouths for the vocal, but we still had to refine it because their movement may not have coincided exactly with the time of the voice. So that needed to be careful attention. So we were in the recording studio, I suppose, for about 8 days, recording all these different voices. I was there obviously just for purposes of synchronisation, and Jim was there for purposes of performance. And we had some wonderful voices for the wonderful, wacky characters that were in the film itself. And it's a film, when you mention to a lot of people Labyrinth, they'll say, oh, I love that. Because once again, it was just so different. And having David in it, of course, helped a lot. But then we came to the point where we had to record David and Jennifer Connelly. I was a little bit nervous about David coming in. I thought we were going to get somebody full of ego. But he came in and introduced to him, and we started recording, and all my fears just melted away. He was truly professional. Very, very nice. The same with Jennifer. Now Jennifer then, she was probably about 14, I think, at that time. During shooting, I think she was 13. But at the time of recording, I think she was 14. Such a pretty girl. So pretty. Now, for somebody so young to re-record in sync to their original, because for technical reasons, once again, the sound may not have been usable at the time of shooting for technical reasons. So I thought, oh dear, somebody so young, this is going to be a bit of a pain in the backside. She did the first line of dialogue, and I went, wow, that was good. So we did the second line of dialogue, that was good. And Jim was saying, it's fine for him, it's fine for me. And we got to the point where we would record a line of dialogue with her, and I'd be happy, Jim would be happy, and she said, can we go again? I think I can make it better. And she went again and made it even better. And her synchronisation, from my point of view, was perfect. Performer point of view for Jim was perfect. So it was an absolute joy, first with David and then with Jennifer. So once again, an uplifting occasion for what is a very complicated job, made so much easier by professionalism.
And Jim Henson was good to work with?
Jim, wonderful man, absolutely wonderful man. Once again, so appreciative, and such a tragedy that he died at such a young age. Really was.
Do you have any particular favourite moments from Labyrinth?
The whole thing was a favourite moment.
Yeah.
It's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah. Again, a classic film from start to...
Exactly.
So then you, of course, another interesting project, Supergirl.
Ah.
Yeah.
With the lovely little Jeannot Schwartz as director.
Yeah.
A guy who has an encyclopedic knowledge of nearly every film crew you could think of. He could tell you the lighting command on this film, a director on that one, a production manager on another one. It was absolutely amazing. But it's a very interesting film. You think now. Faye Dunaway, yes, that's right. Being the mystery woman, casting spells all over the place, and so it came to the casting of the spell. So, what sound does a spell make? So this caused me to scratch my head a bit. Talked to production manager, who happened to know a musician, and who might be able to help. So he called in this guy. I'm just trying to recall his name now. He was the music producer for all of the Moody Blues. And brought him in and said, look, we showed him the film. We said, Faye Dunaway starts to cast this spell, and we need to create something interesting that makes it spell-like. And so he said, well, leave it to me, let me go away and experiment on my own, and I'll send you a 1/4-inch copy of what I've done, and you can analyse it and say yes, no, add, plus, or whatever. Tony Clark, his name was Tony Clark of the Moody Blues. Now, Tony lived on a 63-foot boat moored at Walton Marina here in Surrey. He had his own little recording studio up in the bow of his boat. So he went away and he put these series of noises together, came back to me, and I said, yes, I like this, I'm not sure about that. So it ended up with me going to his boat, with me formulating in my head what I was after, and then guiding him, and then, so we then created a series of noises for all these spells and atmospheres surrounding the spell. And we ran them past Jean O'Shaw and Malcolm Cook, who was the editor, and they were absolutely delighted with what we came up with. So that was, once again, a very successful thing. Very, very successful. Not a great movie, but enjoyable to work on.
I think it was hurt by the fact that Chris Reeve couldn't be lured back to, even though despite he had association with the director having done Somewhere in Time, but unfortunately that wasn't enough to sort of tease him back. But, and Jerry Goldsmith's music, of course, is very, again, I think, a bit of a highlight.
Now, here's another interesting story with regard to Jerry. Now, Jerry Goldsmith, to me, is my idol. I think he's a wonderful composer. We had a particular sequence, flying sequence, Supergirl, and I put these sound effects for the flight and whatever, and Jerry did the music. And we came to that sequence during the dubbing process, and the two didn't work together. So the obvious thing, as I alluded to earlier, they paid more for the music than they did for the sound effects. But Jerry looked at it and said, no, drop the music, the effects work better. And from that moment I fell even deeper in love with Jerry Goldsmith. For a composer to give up something in favour of somebody else's work is almost unknown.
It's a very nice thing to do.
And I was fortunate to work with him again when he did another film. Oh, of course, he did the music for the original Omen, if I remember rightly, which he did a very good score for. I worked on Omen 3, The Final Conflict, which Jerry did a very good score for. But I was doing dialogues on that, so I didn't have occasion to engage with him.
Yeah, it's one of my favourite composers. Did you ever meet John Barry?
very briefly when he visited the cutting rooms.
Yeah.
But he mainly with the editing boys rather than ourselves.
Right. And so of course your A View to a Kill, you're the sound editor on that one. And again, was that any particular challenges on A View to a Kill?
I've got to think about that. That was the one with Tanya Roberts.
Tanya Roberts and Grace Jones.
Yeah.
Have you ever met Tanya Roberts or anything like?
Very briefly, because I was doing the sound effects and my dear colleague Derek Holding was doing the post-sync and dialogues on that. So I met her briefly when she came into the theatre, and then I left them to it. Same with Grace Jones. But the fun part of that was the car chase through Paris streets with the half car.
Yeah.
And all the other chases, of course, that went on. That was amazing. Once again, we were doing lots of, I think it was in that one with the Aston Martin in the snow.
Oh, that would be the one after. That'd be Living Daylights.
Living Daylight, that's right.
One.
Yeah, getting confused about what was in what sequence in what film.
You've got the great chase through San Francisco with the fire truck. And that was the big challenge. As luck would have it, somebody over there had the forethought that once shooting was over, that we needed to get all those effects together. So they actually went out with a fire truck and recorded as far as they could recall what was necessary. And I didn't have to draw upon any sound line material at all. I was able to adapt and create what was necessary for the whole fire truck sequence. You know, and the bridge, you know where it goes, the bridge goes up and all the police cars screeching to a halt and the wheels spinning as it rolls back down. And, oh, that was great fun. The stunt guys had a whale of a time recreating that car chase. Really did. Yeah, it looks like a fun sequence, and of course the police car getting squashed by the counterbalance.
Yes.
As well. The mine sequence, I think, was notable too, wasn't it?
Yes, yes. The big shootout and the train. We did the lug train in the tunnel.
Yeah.
We because of the confines of shooting at the time, it was very hard to get the microphone in to get the sound at the time. So we one evening we had a separate recording session. Once they'd wrapped for the day, taking the sound recorders back in, and having seen the rushes, knowing what we needed to do, so we sent him off down the track and then, this speed, that speed, change course, screech, and when it stopped. So we recreated the whole sequence on the set on that, and that was good. And of course, then we come to the airship.
I was just going to mention that, yes.
Oh, what a day that was. I went to the office once again, said, I can't get any sound effects from the library for the airship for what we need. And they got on to airship industries in this country, because I think what was used on location in the States was one for one of the different companies that promotes, I think it was a tyre company in the film. I can't.
Michelin might have been.
I'm not quite sure.
Anyway, yeah.
we had the equivalent airship here in this country, over at Bedfordshire, I think it was. They got onto them and said, can we hire an airship for a day? And they said, yeah, sure. So contact was made, and we brought down 2 pilots from the airship company, and we ran them the sequences of the airship in the film, and they were totally blown away what they were seeing. So it was arranged that we picked a day, and off we went, and we arrived there on a beautifully clear blue sky, but very chilly, but perfect day for recording. So we started. I got my list of what I wanted to do, but the problem was communication. We couldn't talk to them on walkie-talkies because otherwise that would be picked up on the recording. So we formulated a series of me doing arm waving and signalling and whatever, and this is what we decided to do. So we started off and wanted to go down there, for about a mile and do a slow approach, and then come up and over. The next time, do a slow approach, turn away, do a slow approach, stop, pause, away. So it's all different hand signals and indications for what needed to be done. And then we came to do the interior. So we climbed into the gondola underneath, and we then sort of took off. They went up to about 400 feet and then stopped in midair while we formulated what the first thing is we wanted to do. But the pilots, people there, decided that they would change the ballast in the balloon, which is water-based. So they pumped water from the back to the front. And we were sitting there, 400 feet, and the balloon is just doing this, pointing down to the ground, about 40 degrees. And of course, we're sitting here like this, but they knew what they were doing, and they sort of just, they were just testing out for their own purposes, but to us it seemed like they were having a joke at our expense, but no, they weren't. So we then did a total reenactment of what we'd done exterior-wise. It was a very successful day, and I came back and applied it to the visuals, and it worked extremely well. What made it interesting was the power source was a pair of Porsche engines, one each side of the cabin, and it made a wonderful noise. So we were, and you got a lot of high revs out of it and power. Excuse me. And it worked extremely well, I'm pleased to say, because that was a very expensive operation to carry out if it hadn't worked.
And a fantastic sequence in
oh yes, most enjoyable.
And a much darker film, I think, compared to some of the.
Yes.
I mean, that may not have been so evident when you were making it, but
in the mine, I mean, that mad shootout.
Yes. Yeah.
Shooting bodies in the water. And
yeah.
That was not one of my favourite sequences.
And again, all played on sound as well.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
There was never a sense of needing to perhaps turn it down a little bit, or it felt okay
well,
at the time.
Well, they did, once again, the composer sort of fronted most of it. Things like the gunshot just were biting through the music, so it was just enough.
Yeah.
Not to overdo it.
Because then some stuff's a bit more comic with the Beach Boys theme in the beginning of the scenes, so it kind of balances it out. I suppose it's nice to do, because of course there's a skiing sequence in Cortina, and for yours only those interesting sequences to
yes
to do.
Oh yeah, the bobsleigh, the going down the Cresta Run, that was they were able to get quite a bit of stuff from original shooting, but I had to come up with more stuff to enhance it, to make it more interesting. But and of course the motorbikes, great fun with them, trying to create all the motorbike stuff. We managed to do that with separate recording sessions. Incidentally, that takes me back, if I may, to Octopussy, the tuk-tuk chase.
Oh yes, yeah.
That was once again great fun because, as you know, it's just a tiny little engine, but that's no good. So obviously it starts off with the conventional, but then when the chase starts, when it turns on the turbo, that's when we changed it over to, we got a 400cc Honda motorbike and took the exhaust pipe off and did a complete reenactment of the chase from that point on, and that was great fun. Screaming around the studio in between the stages, because it didn't matter about the acoustics of the stages, because it all takes place in the marketplace.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter. But it was great fun recreating it.
So you've got to work with a lot of lovely vehicles,
Yes.
as we've talked about.
The Aston Martin.
Which brings us quite nicely on to the Living Daylights and the Ice Chase, of course, Stephen B.
Yes.
Aston Martin, yeah.
That was a big number. Once again went to the office and said, look, we need to do this. They say, okay, we'll talk to Aston Martin. So we arranged a day, and once again I think we were at Bovingdon Aerodrome. This Aston Martin, I think it was a Vantage convertible, which had just come out of the workshop having a complete refit. And once again, we'd bought a driver down to show him the sequence that we need to recreate. So the guy turns up, so we start off and say, right, I want you to come down here at 90 miles an hour, where I put a bollard, spin it 3 times and then come past me. So, and this was the start of the whole chase sequence. And for where it went onto the ice and snow, we were able to go on to wet grass, which doubled for the snow scenarios, but when we were on the road, obviously, we just used the runway. But recreating that whole chase was very challenging, but great fun. Really was. And you know, the same with all the vehicles that were involved.
The Hercules plane at the end strikes me as a good sequence.
Very good. I mean, as luck would have it, and I was able to acquire a lot of Hercules tracks from a previous film that I'd worked on, so we were able to apply it to there. So we didn't need to get anything extra, because there is a lot in library should you need it. But I had, I think, about 90% of what was required for the whole the whole flying sequence. The interiors, the exteriors, the engine starting up, slowing down, and then the taxiing. So I had all of that. It was just a question of applying it as and where.
I think some of my favourite sound effects might not always be perhaps the most obvious. The sounds of the cargo nets as they're fighting on the, the straining and the
Yes.
lovely twang that when the course
Yes.
breaks. And
Once again, that was, sort of, we had to come up with a sound that sort of established itself in spite of the fact being you've got a gale force wind, you've got aircraft noise, but so it had to be something that as it cut through, it just established itself enough without going over the top. But because of the nature of those nets, we were able to take a certain amount of license as to what we could do with it. So, no, it was very good.
I think what we were talking about earlier about what makes a Bond sound, that perhaps might be a good example of something that cuts through.
Yes.
It is perhaps a difference between that and a regular
Yes.
film. Were there any other highlights of the Living Daylights before we move on?
Trying to remember the whole story, the truth be known.
It's quite a all-encompassing film in the respect it starts off with Gibraltar, and then we've got Vienna, and we've got
The Prater Park, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Vernon was able to advise me a lot about the sound effects of the Prater Park, because he'd been there at some time, and we were able to, basically it's a, as we know, it's a fairground, so those effects were sort of reasonably easy to come to find. But it was very good.
And in terms of the cast, would you have met Roger Moore much at all?
Well, I've worked on 5 films with Roger, not just the Bonds, but Wild Geese and sort of Esther, Ruth and Jennifer.
Naughty Hijack.
Naughty Hijack, yes.
Which I did an eventful incident. Yeah,
and the Seawolves.
Seawolves as well. Yeah. So, was he as lovely as everybody thinks he is?
Yes, it's perfectly true. Roger was an absolute joy to work with.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing's taken seriously. I mean, he's forever playing jokes and practical jokes, sort of to great effect. Sort of on the set, if he blew a line or something, he'd come out with something suitably rude.
Any of the practical jokes repeatable, or was it kind of?
Not really, no. Not for the purpose of this exercise. Off camera, maybe.
I know he did like to play jokes on Desmond Llewellyn in terms of changing his lines.
Yes,
to make them
that's right.
even more
He'd throw in,
complicated.
yes.
Yeah.
He'd throw in by changing the line. Or if Roger was off camera, he would do strange, funny faces while Desmond was trying to do his dialogue.
I did meet Desmond Llewellyn a couple of times.
Okay.
I was only about 10, I think, 11 when I did, and he used to go to the Bond conventions in his Q outfit.
Yes.
And he was lovely guy. One of those people that really embraced that connection. How was Timothy Dalton then in comparison?
Well, the trouble is, following in Roger's footsteps is very hard.
Yes.
But I understand the author felt that Timothy was nearest to the Bond character that he envisaged.
Yeah, I think Cody Broccoli thought that this is very much Bond of the books, and that Ian Fleming would very much approve of him. Yeah.
A lot of people liked Timothy because they thought Roger at times was a little bit OTT, which is fine, it's their opinion. But they thought that Timothy was too much the other way. I mean, Timothy had trouble doing a throwaway line.
Yeah.
It was an actor saying a line. It wasn't an actor like Sean Connery who could say, it's shocking.
Yeah. He obviously had a much more serious background to him, and whether he always felt that comfortable, perhaps more so in License to Kill, where it's a bit more, a bit more meat to the drama side of it. Yeah. But I think probably a bit ahead of his time, because then you get to Daniel Craig, and it's very much kind of building on the things you saw in Dalton's.
I think by the time Tim came to do his second one, he was more into the part by then.
Yeah.
I think his Living Daylights was a hard intro for him.
And I think also it was kind of written with not necessarily a Bond in mind, because of course it was originally with Pierce Brosnan, and then Timothy came in so License to Kill was more tailored to him. Do you have a favourite Bond that you've worked on?
Well, I've got to say Roger.
Good, Roger, yeah.
Of the ones I've worked on, but
yeah.
With all due respect, I think Sean is the only one for me.
Yeah, there's something unbeatable about obviously the actor that originates the role, of course.
But he was of my time.
Yeah.
Like I grew up with Sean, like many others did.
Yeah. Well, I'd say my favourite Bond is from Russia of Love. So it's something quite nice about the spy, pure spy films, and then of course
because I don't know if you know, I believe it's Cubby's favourite.
I did hear that somewhere, yeah. So,
and it was certainly Norman's favourite.
And what do you think of the newer Bonds as sort of?
It took me time to come to terms with Craig. I liked him in the part, but it's just a pity that the humour is no longer there. It is just another action caper movie, which I personally feel the Bourne Identity do better.
Yeah, very much inspired by
Yes.
that sort of thing, yeah.
Yes. I mean, I'm sure I should be hung, drawn and quartered for saying that, but that's my honest opinion. The lack of humour. It doesn't need to be much, just every now and then.
I think that's a common, most Bond fans would kind of agree with you on that one, that the humour is kind of scaled back a little bit. It does come here occasionally, but it is sparingly used. If I may ask you what you thought of No Time to Die, just out of interest, whether you quite liked that film.
Very good action movie, far too long.
By 20 getting a lot longer these days,
by 20 minutes, far too long.
Yeah. You've got to have a good bladder control on you these days for films.
Yes, especially if you're seeing something like Oppenheimer.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
It's the ultimate test.
So I just want to talk about the Bond sounds. Is there any particular Bond sound or that you are the most proud of? Anything that sort of says, oh yeah, this is something I really love?
Well, I suppose all the Bond sound, it's the recreating of all the chases that proved to be successful. I suppose that's my proudest moment, that the things really worked, because the potential for something to go wrong or not quite complement the visual is a real challenge. When you've got the final results of a $39 million movie resting on your shoulders, it kind of focuses the mind.
Yes.
It really does.
Yeah.
And having worked on 5, I think I've justified my existence on them, which may seem a strange phrase to use, but that's me.
Well, you can see the work and the finished result and how
Yes.
you see everybody doing their job well.
That said, I would love to go back and redo them all over again with today's technology.
So there's not
The enhancement
Yeah.
that I could now apply to those films would be amazing.
Yeah. So like any artist, you wouldn't consider one thing to be perfect. There's always things you think, oh, I could change this and
Yes.
change that.
The way you can enhance material now is much, because with a lot of the early ones for me, you could only put so much noise on a soundtrack because you had limitations on a soundtrack. Even when it came to the stereo, you couldn't go over so many dB with an explosion. But now you can blow the speakers out in a cinema with the level you can put on, which we couldn't. Which is what the kind of enhancement that sort of makes today's films, because you could really go to the limits. Some people are saying there's too much sound in cinemas now, and in certain cases, I agree with them. You're sitting there and you're recoiling.
Well, certainly if you see anything in IMAX, and the sound in there is very impressive, and that's just the logo that comes at saying IMAX, which is the huge, so does it potentially take away from other aspects of the films? And also, there seems to be a lot more music in films than there was. I think there's only like 40 minutes of music that John Barry composed for, say, Moonraker, and then you've got Mission Impossible, and there's 2 hours of music. So where that is an argument to say it detracts a little bit, potentially.
I'm just trying to think which Bond was Blofeld down the chimney.
Oh, that was Few Eyes Only.
Few Eyes Only, you're right. That whole sequence was shot almost mute, of the aerial stuff.
Yeah.
So it was all shot in round about the Beckton Gasworks in East London. So I knew that they were going to be doing just a bit of shooting to finish off with the helicopter one day. So I arranged with my assistant to go down to Beckton Gasworks to get whatever I could. So we arrived there, and the Beckton Gasworks, there was a high official there from the gaswork company, and I don't know if it was part of a deal or whatever, but the helicopter, Mark Wolf, the helicopter pilot, was going to give him a joy flight. So my assistant knew Mark Wolf, the pilot, and explained why we were there. So the gas guy, when he got in the helicopter took off, and Mark then did this complete sequence of throwing the helicopter around in the sky, up and over, circling, stopping, hovering, dropping, everything that we needed, ostensibly to give this guy a jolly, but perfect for my requirement, because that whole sequence. So I was able to apply all this wonderful helicopter to the visual which demanded it. So that was most enjoyable.
Moving away from Bond,
yes.
One of my favourite films, Frankenstein, the Kenneth Branagh version. I wonder if that sort of has any highlights.
Yes, I was a co-supervising sound editor on that, along with another guy called Campbell Askew. Campbell had worked with Ken before, I believe, so I was taken on as an editor, but I was contacted, strangely enough, by the editor of the film rather than Campbell himself. So in a way, I was seconded on to Campbell, but Campbell, bless him, was agreeable that I should join him. But there was a lot of undercurrent. I don't think I'm talking out of question here, between the editor and Campbell and myself, purely because the editor would not stop cutting. You know, we were trying to apply stuff to a visual, but no sooner would be like, then we found that he'd recut it behind us. And so we were constantly going back and back and back. But that didn't affect the final product itself. It was just rather frustrating during the whole post-production time.
And did Kenneth Branagh have much?
Campbell fronted it and sort of came up with some very good stuff, especially in the laboratory where Frankenstein was experimenting. So Ken was a joy to work with. Again, we're very fortunate to work with somebody like that. And dear old Patrick Doyle, the composer, did a wonderful job with the score.
If we're going to talk about film composers, of course you mentioned J. Goldsmith, John Barry's a favourite, but if you said to me who my favourite composer is, it may not be the obvious choice as a Bond fan, but I think Patrick Doyle, I absolutely love his work.
I was contracted, let me start at the beginning. I was approached by a post-production supervisor saying there's an Anglo-Canadian production coming to London for post-production. Would I attend an interview to be the sound editor on the film? I said yes, I would. So it was a film that was all shot in Canada. Canadian-French director. To my knowledge, never worked outside of Canada. He may have worked in America. It's a film called La Nouvelle France. What was unique about it was the fact being it was shot twice. Once in French and once in English. The lead actor was Gérard Depardieu. Gerard in the French version, great. Gerard did not like speaking English. So it was taken as read that Gerard's voice for the English version would be a revoice. So, going back just a little bit, I attended the interviews, as did many others. And I got a phone call late one Friday night saying, "We're running the film tomorrow morning in Soho. Would you please attend?" Fine. So I go up to Soho and I meet the director, who came with a formidable reputation for being a hard taskmaster. But he was nervous because he would be working with a crew he's never met or worked with before. So we ran the film, and then we went back to the office and talked about it. They agreed that I would be the supervising sound editor on it. So there we are with two versions of the same film. But because of the language and everything else, there were two different cuts. But they had done a lot of work on the French version, and we just had to sort of tidy it up for purposes of making it universal between the two. We had to realign material from one version to another to make it the same. Came the time to talk about the revoice of Gerard. Once again, I contracted this voice artist, and he came down and saw Gerard. He knew Gerard, of Gerard anyway, came down and saw what was going to be required, went away, and he sent us late one Friday afternoon 3 artists to test for Gerard. So we chose a particular sequence, and we would run the sequence with Gerard's bad English, and they would get the timing in their mind and switch it off, and they would then do their version to Gerard's visual. And it was up to the director to say yay or nay. So we were fast running out of time, so we done the first 2, and the director said, "Don't think so." So this is cool. Oh, we've just got 20 minutes, call the last guy in. He came in and he saw it and started to do it, but he started to copy Gerard's voice. And he got very close. And the director said, no, we'll go with him. I mean, he wasn't worried about the English version really, he was only worried about the French version. So came the day to do the whole film. So if I can say that this actor is David Benting. He's the lead actor in The Archers.
Oh yes, yes.
I think he's a lord of some kind.
Yes, doing about.
Anyway, we start the recording and we do about the first 6 lines of dialogue, and he's getting closer and closer and closer to Gerard's voice. And he kept on in that vein throughout the whole movie. When it came to us in the dubbing scenario, applying the revoice to the new scene, some of Gerard's original English voice wasn't bad. So we used the revoice to there, switch over to Gerard, down to there, where it was no good, come back to the revoice. We ping-ponged all the way through the film, and that's what came out in the final version. When one of the Canadian producers saw the final version, they said, "Oh, Gerard's English has improved a lot, hasn't it?" And to this day, I don't think they knew. But it was one of those things that, yes, we tried something and it worked.
I think that's the most difficult thing with talking to voiceover artists. There's a lady called Nikki de Vandersil. Do you know Nikki at all?
Yes, no, Nikki.
Yeah. I interviewed her via email, and I also wanted her to ask if she could sign some stuff for me. And I thought I would just post stuff to her, and she'd come to my house in London, and she signed it all. And we had a nice little informal conversation, nothing recorded sadly, but it was just a lovely little moment. So from my point of view, she was fantastic, although I do know there was other sides and other complications, but personally, she was lovely from my point of view. But she revoiced some Jane Seymour's performance in Live and Let Die, and some of it's Jane, some of it's her, and matching.
Yes.
That is, I think, is.
Did she do Shirley Eaton in Goldfinger?
Yes, that was where the problems all came from, I think, because I think Shirley Eaton and a lot of the Bond girls didn't know that they were being revoiced, so it wasn't the voiceover artist's fault.
No.
But I think they took it a bit personally.
Yeah.
And I think when it came to conventions, they could book Nikki and they could book Shirley, and of course Shirley was a bigger crowd, so they cut Nikki out a bit. And I think there was a few little things, sadly, that happened. I think also she was cut from some of Bond stars, Gareth's events as well. But you knew her, and she was.
Yes.
Yeah. And, did you know Robert Reetig at all?
Yes. I've worked with Robert.
Nice chap, or?
Robert, we called the voice of them all. I think in one Bond movie, he did 5 different parts.
Yes, he did do a lot of the early Bond films, yeah.
Which is very naughty of Robert.
Yeah.
Personally speaking.
It was the same with Nikki. She did all the voices apart from Lois Maxwell and Dr. No.
Yes.
So it's kind of voice. If you could adapt your voice and
have
a good voice, you know. Yeah. And what was striking when I met Nikki was that she had an intercom at her block of flats, and I pressed the button, introduced myself, and the voice that came back was the voice of Ursula Andress. It hadn't aged at all. Despite the fact she was about 80.
Yes.
So that was quite striking. But the importance of people like that, I think, can't be overstated really. I wanted to mention Remains of the Day. Do you have any memories of working with Anthony Hopkins, etc.?
Yes. My very first film for Merchant Ivory, very nervous because they had a formidable reputation, for being hard taskmasters. But I attended the very first screening and interview, and they agreed to take me on to do it. And a lovely film with a wonderful cast. Dear old Christopher Reeve. Sort of tragedy that he died in those circumstances.
Did you have much to do with Christopher?
I had a recording session. We had to do a recording session with Chris, and Hugh Grant and Anthony and and Emma, of course. All-star cast, wonderful. And being able to trying to create the atmosphere of that period. At the end of shooting, they had to do half a day's pick-up at Badminton House down the M4, I think it is, where they did some of the shooting. So the idea was they were going to spend a Saturday morning doing the pick-ups. And I said, well, can I go, as you've got a sound recorders there, can I go down there and then use him for the rest of the day to record the sounds of the house and the doors? And yes, fine, they were pleased with that because it wouldn't cost them any more money because they were already paying. So we arrive at Badminton House, which is a magnificent old English country mansion, absolutely huge, windows and doors everywhere and corridors. So we set about recalling the ambience of the place itself. We put ourselves in the middle of the house with the corridor and doors open, and you could hear servants working down in the corridors and the various departments within the house, and recording all the wonderful clocks that they had there, and getting the ambience of the rooms, and opening and closing the wonderful old heavy doors that they used to have. And there is a sequence in the film where Christopher Reeve is walking down these solid oak stairs, delivering his line of dialogue. And he had very hard leather boots on, and most of the dialogue is got by this plonk, plonk, plonk while he's talking. So while I was there, I made a note of roughly the timing of the coming in. So I went to the top of the stairs with ordinary shoes on and walked down, and we'd already recorded his dialogue for that sequence. Putting the two together, I had a sync track, recreated a sync track, and the director was blown away with what we were able to do in doing that. Even down to the fact that he steps off the wood stairs onto the flagstone floors and walks off down the corridor.
Yeah.
So I was able to do the whole sequence myself.
Well, that's a very good idea.
Yeah.
I always get a sense of Christopher Reeve as, again, one of those very, very, very nice people.
Yeah, very laid back.
Yeah.
And, sort of going up on top of the stables was this wonderful old bell tower, and we heard it strike 10. Oh, we've got to come back at 11 o'clock. We recorded it at 11 o'clock to use in the film. So, because it was just off key. That's what made it so interesting. It wasn't just another bell striking, it was just slightly off key that made it interesting in itself. And then the wonderful old car that Anthony drives down to the West Country. We recorded that as well. That was wonderful because it had that wonderful gearbox whine to it.
As somebody that works in sound, do you always, even if you're on holiday, will you take a sound recorder just in case you pick something up?
No, I should have done, but no.
So there is a nice distinctiveness between when you're working, when you're not. So that's kind of
exactly
the best way to put it to do it. Do you have any memories of Anthony Hopkins you'd like to share?
I can't remember. Did I relate?
I think we were talking in a break about
right,
it. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Anthony Hopkins, yes. Working for him for the second time. Granada Television had set up a film division making small films, and the first one that they decided to make was a film called called August, which was a remake of Chekhov's Uncle Vanya. Anthony was going to star and direct in the film. For reasons I don't know, the film was all shot in Mould in North Wales. So I was contracted to do the film by the editor who was working on it. He was a Granada regular editor, but I'd known him when he worked at Pinewood many years beforehand. So I joined him and the rest of the crew up in Mould for the last 2 weeks of shooting, while I accustomed myself to meeting the cast, reading the script, formulating what effects and ideas I would have for the final product. The idea was going to be that the final post-production was going to be done at Granada Television's own facility in Manchester. So we had a most enjoyable time those first 2 weeks. Came the end of shooting, Anthony then took the whole cast of the film into the local theatre in Mould, and redirected the cast to do exactly the same production, but on stage, as a thank you to the people of Mould for their tolerance in allowing the film to be shot in their vicinity. It went down extremely well and got very good write-ups in the local press. We then left Mould and decamped back to Granada in Manchester, where the editing continued to proceed, and I then set about my post-production. Anthony wanted to take the whole of the editing crew out to dinner one night, so we agreed on an evening, and came said evening, Anthony and I were staying in the same hotel. So this evening I go down to the lobby, Anthony is standing there, and I start talking to him, and the lift doors open and Billy Connolly emerges. He sees Anthony, Anthony sees him, huge hugs and embraces, and for the next 10 minutes I'm in stitches as they're recounting stories to each other. Billy was doing a tour around the country, so off he went, and then the rest of our editing crew arrived, and we went off to this very nice Indian restaurant in Manchester that Anthony paid for. Had a very, very nice evening, and I was fortunate enough to end up sitting next to Anthony, and he was telling me all about his early life and how as a child he used to like going into the front room and playing the piano, and sort of it was a fascinating evening. And at one point, for no reason at all, he suddenly burst into a Tommy Cooper impression, and Anthony, his takeoff was absolutely perfect, but it was so strange seeing what you would call perhaps a straight-laced actor suddenly doing Tommy Cooper, but it was such an amazing experience to enjoy, so most enjoyable. And we finished the film. It was the only one that Granada made under their film badge, because I think they ran into financial problems, because Anthony wanted to do the next one again. He wanted to do a remake of The Winslow Boy, but for some reason unknown to us, it never really happened, and I think August was the only film that the Granada Film Division actually made.
So it sounds like, would Anthony Hopkins be your favourite actor to have worked with?
Certainly one of, yes. Yes, so professional. And just so nice with it.
And in those early days when you was new to the business, would you have got a bit starstruck meeting some of the staff?
Initially, yes, of course. Just going back to my very first film, The Valiant, with John Mills as the lead actor. I can remember as a 10-year-old going with the whole school to a cinema in Kensington where they were running the film Scott of the Antarctic, which starred John Mills. So to be at Shepton Studios working on a film with John Mills, who's the star, having to go and collect him off the set to go and do a recording session, I was then starstruck for the very first time. But yes, it happened a couple of times after that, but after a while we can get a little bit blasé about our relationships with some of the stars, but not very often.
It becomes normal, doesn't it?
Yes.
It's a normal part of your life, and of course quite a few lovely leading ladies you would have met or seen.
Yes, one in particular is dear old Gwyneth Paltrow. We did the film Emma, written and directed by an American director, which was then for the Weinstein Company, who were sort of great prolific filmmakers in their day. And Emma was one with Gwyneth, and Ewan McGregor in the cast as well, and Colette, Australian actress. Toni Collette.
Yes, that's it, yes.
Toni Collette. And Emma Thompson's sister, I can't remember her name now. But an all-star cast. Cummings, I think. Yes, Cummings.
Oh, Alan Cummings?
Alan Cummings, yes. Written and directed by an American. I believe that the writer was worried about who was going to direct it. So I think the Weinstein said, well, we'll let you direct it. So that's exactly what he did. But once again, at the end of the film, we had to do a lot of post-sync recording for technical reasons, which involved the director, myself, and the dialect coach flying to Canada to record Gwyneth, all her lines. We had the most enjoyable recording session for a long, long time with Gwyneth. She was great fun and very, very professional. And the director was very appreciative of me being there and sort of riding on his shoulder because it was all fairly new to him. It was interesting that sort of just before lunch, one of the producers came in and said, "Hey, we're breaking for lunch." So everybody looked at each other and said, "Yeah, sure." So the producer took us to a very swish restaurant just down the road, very, very nice. And on the way there, Gwyneth took my hand and said, "Colin, please sit next to me because I want to sit next to you." I thought, that's very, very strange. So we go to the restaurant, we sit, and sure enough, she sits next to me. The reason being, Gwyneth was a great animal person, and she had dogs, and it came up in conversation that I had a dog. So all she wanted to do, bless her, was to talk about our relationship with dogs. So we had a most enjoyable lunch. So she was able to talk about anything other than the film we were actually working on. So of course I enjoyed it for what it was, and I think she did. And we had a good relationship to the extent that when she was going to do Shakespeare in Love, she was working in Shepperton, and she invited me to go down to visit her on set to see her. And I'd also been working on another film with Joe Fiennes. And so I was able to see Gwyneth again and catch up with Joe Fiennes. So most enjoyable experience working with both of them.
Yes, that sounds lovely. I did encounter Gwyneth Paltrow at a food festival. She was had a cookbook out and she was doing a food demonstration. I didn't know she was going to be there. So it was kind of interesting seeing this Hollywood.
The other side.
Yeah, doing some cooking for you. So that's quite interesting. I believe you had a very brief encounter with Sophia Loren.
Working at Pinewood, it was on lunchtime. There is a long corridor in Pinewood. I came in from one end, the double doors opened at the other end, and there was this vision of beauty called Sophia Loren coming down the corridor in this wonderful long mink coat, looking at an absolute more than $1 million. And I instantly fell in love at that point in time, but then again I have to ask, who wouldn't?
Precisely, yes. I wanted to ask you briefly about working on Ned Kelly and Heath Ledger.
Ned Kelly, interesting. Working with the wonderful film editor, John Gregory, who sadly is no longer with us. He cut the Billboards film, which was a great success. But anyway, John was cutting Ned Kelly. John and I had worked together before on a film called Pushing Tin. So there we were on Ned Kelly for with an Australian director whose name escapes me for the moment, but it will come. All-star cast with Heath Ledger and co. Story taking place in Australia about the Irish family. It was all shot in Australia. They came back to London for post-production. When the producers saw the first assembly, it seems that they thought the Irish accent was too thick overall for a worldwide audience. So requested that the actors redid all their lines of dialogue again. So this represented approximately about 50% of the film. So I had to prepare all this dialogue, and most of them had gone back to the States. So it was arranged that we would go to Los Angeles to record all lines of dialogue, getting everybody together in the same recording studio, of which Heath was one, Naomi Watts, Geoffrey Rush, Orlando Bloom, I can't remember a couple more, it will come to me. So Heath had the biggest amount of work to do. It took 5 whole days to do the whole film, and the poor director, he was going spare because he'd been through it once through the shooting, but to have to sit there through it all over again, but with the advice of the dialogue coach alongside. Anyway, they all were superb in doing it. But what was interesting with regard to the climax of the film, where the gang put on their steel helmets and their armour, was having Heath put the helmet on again with a microphone inside and outside, and redoing the dialogue for the shootout. It was an interesting exercise, but once again it all worked out extremely well. So on one of the days, about halfway through the week, Heath said, "Hey, we breaking for lunch?" Everybody said, "Yeah, okay." So he said, "I fancy having a burger. Anybody want a burger?" And a few people said, yes. And I said, "Oh," he said to me, "Would you like one, Colin?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Come on then." So we go to his car, get into this beautiful BMW, and we take off like we're in a police pursuit case, and we go to his favourite burger bar somewhere in West Hollywood, and we walk in, and I thought, somebody's got to recognise him. And we walked up the bar, and they said, "What do you want?" And he placed the order for all these burgers. They said, "What's your name?" And he gave them a completely fictitious name. But because of the fictitious name, nobody recognised him. So we got the burgers, back in the car, back this high-speed chase back to the studio to consume our burgers and carry on the session. The most enjoyable time was had by all.
That sounds wonderful. I wondered, do you have a favourite project of your career?
Very hard to say a favourite, because for various reasons one or another stick out. The Terry Gilliam film, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, a very demanding picture on all counts, full of special effects, and during the shooting there was an awful lot going on in terms of special effects, or instructions being shouted around the actors doing their parts. So it was taken as read that a lot of the dialogue would have to be done all over again. So that fell to me. I was going to be the dialogue editor on the film. A guy called Peter Pennell was going to do the sound effects. So it took me ages to prepare the necessary shoots for the recording. The recording was going to take place in Canada. So Terry was busy overseeing the cut of the picture. So he sent his right-hand man, who was also in the film, an actor named Charles McEwen, along with me to look at the performance point of view while I looked at the synchronization. The young actress at the time, I think she was 9, was Polly, forgive me, I've forgotten her name now, but it will come to me. She got nearly the whole film to do. And she came in, and once again, I was nervous about a youngster having to do recording and do it in sync. After about the third line of dialogue, once again, I could relax. She fell into it like she'd been doing it all her life, like she'd been a professional. And there was one point when I just raised an issue about the way she'd done a particular line, and she turned to me, she said, "Colin, you do your job, I'll do mine." And this was from a 9-year-old, but she obviously she was precocious, but lovely with it. And from there on, we were absolutely fine. And so the end result was that of the final production, we had replaced about 76% of the whole dialogue track in a recording studio, not shot at the time. So that, from the personal point of view, a great selling. I had 976 lines of dialogue to record and synchronise and replace. I thought I was going to get to 1,000, but it didn't happen.
Well, not far off.
But in that film was also Eric Idle and Robin. Oh heavens! Famous comedian.
Williams?
Robin. I apologise. The famous comedian Robin Williams. Now, Robin had a lot of ad-libs to do. When he came in, we started the session. I had trouble keeping notes because we were laughing so much. He was doing his lines of dialogue, but while the film was being rewound, he was going into his comedy routines, and I was having trouble writing my notes because we were just laughing and laughing and laughing. But he was absolutely superb, and the final result was excellent.
And do you have any projects that, on the flip side, were difficult or you just don't particularly like, or anything that's sort of a bit traumatising?
I did one film with the famous Mr. Otto Preminger, a well-known taskmaster. I can't remember the film, it's probably just as well because it was an unmemorable film. It was a film that was doomed from the start. It was all shot in Africa, and while they were there, the crew went on strike because they found out their salaries weren't being paid in to their bank accounts back here in England. I think they had about 3 strikes which were then overcome when more money was put into the banks. Anyway, the film finally finished shooting and returned to England, where there was a young English editor doing the film Otto. He agreed to do it because he needed a break, and working with Otto gave him some kudos. And Otto was prepared to take him on because he was cheap, given the budget of the film. They'd already taken on the sound editor to work on the film. He'd been on it for a month and hadn't been paid, he discovered. So he demanded payment, and they said, it's coming, but it never did. So the sound editor one weekend went to the studio, picked up all the reels of film, took them home, put them under his bed and said, "You won't get it back until I get paid." Surprise, surprise, he got paid, he got fired. So the editor then approached myself and another sound editor. We went for an interview, and Otto was sort of sitting there, and we walked in the room and he looked us up and down, and because we'd just taken a run to look at the film before we actually met him. I forgot about that. "What do you think of my film?" "It's fine, Mr. Branagh. It's a lot of work. You don't think you can do it, you go." I said, "That's not what we said, Mr. Branagh. We just said there's a lot of work and we can do it." So in those days, for some strange reason, I sometimes wore a suit. My assistant never did. So Otto looks me up and down. "Why are you wearing a suit?" I said, "Because I was being interviewed by you, Mr. Branagh." So to my assistant, I said, "Why are you not wearing a suit?" He said, "Because he gets paid more money than I do." At which Otto nearly smiled. He wasn't prepared to do a laugh, but he almost smiled. And that's it. So anyway, we set about working on the film, doing our bit. And one day the phone rang in our room, and it was a journalist saying, "We understand you're working on the film, and we understand there's payment problems." I said, "Well, yes, we've had a couple, but we have been paid." He said, "Can we talk to Mr. Branagh?" "Well, I'll go and I'll see if he'll talk to you." So I went into the room and said, "Mr. Branagh, there's a call for you." So Otto came and took the call, and he was talking to the journalist. And this wonderful Austrian accent, he was saying, "I have paid my people, I have paid my people, I have sold one of my paintings." So anyway, that seemed to satisfy the journalist, and we finished the film. Not a great movie. As I say, I can't remember the name, but it doesn't matter because I think it's one I left off my CV.
He sounds like a very interesting character, Otto. Not doesn't seem to be a bad, but man of few words, but okay if you're on the right side.
Oh, if you're on the right, but he liked to keep people in fear of him.
I know a few people like that, yes. One film that I just want to mention very, very briefly might be difficult because of the change of directors, Fierce Creatures. That, I think, is something you not overly keen on, are you?
Very difficult. Probably the worst film of my career, to the extent that it nearly made me very ill.
Right.
The film was cursed almost from the beginning. The film was shot, came and was edited, went to the States for a preview. The previews did not go well. Back to the studio for a re-edit, and then back to the States for another preview. Did not go well. The return to England, they decided that they needed to take a fresh look at the whole thing, so they fired the original editor and sound crew while they sat down and decided to do a script rewrite and commission new sets to be built and a new director to be taken on board. The director was Australian by the name of Fred Skepsey, not known for his comedy films. For reasons best known to themselves, he was given the job of doing the reshoot and the re-edit and the finishing of the film. He brought with him his own director, my apologies, he brought with him his own Australian editor. Not familiar with the English way of working, but so be it. So I was commissioned to join the film as their sound editor to finish the film off. If anything could go wrong on that film, it did. In the editing process, in the post-production process, the pressures that were put upon us, the poor assistants were run ragged with a lack of communication from the editor. But anyway, we progressed as best we could, and it came to when it do the final dub of the picture. Now, the main part of the story takes place in the English countryside, a zoo in the middle of the English countryside. So I put a very nice English countryside atmosphere across the stereo track. We start to run the film for Fred, and he lets me know in no uncertain terms, Colin, get rid of the birds. So there went my stereo atmosphere for the whole film. So give me more animals, more animals, more animals. So it was very, very hard to do. And anyway, we did a dub to take to the preview in America again. So off we go to America, and while we're there, we record some of the actors from the film as a result of the reshoot. So anyway, the screenings did not go particularly well. So we came back to England again. Once again, there was a major re-edit, once again with all the associated problems with communication or lack of, as the case may be. But eventually the film was finished, and I was like a nervous wreck at the end with all the pressures and everything that could go wrong. Anyway, we finished it, and it came out, but everybody was expecting a fish called Wanda, but it certainly wasn't that. It was a fish that sunk in the ocean.
It had impossible pressure on it from the...
Impossible pressure on everybody, mainly by lack of communication, mainly from, dare I say it, from Fred and his editor. But these things happen.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you don't realise, let's say, when you go into it, it's not going to quite work, and things do, of course happen. Just to finish off, Colin, is there any projects that I haven't mentioned that you would have liked to just briefly mention?
Yes, a film called The Bone Collector, director Philip Noyce. A director I'd be happy to work with at any time. He was so professional. The story goes, the film was shot in Canada as doubling for New York, starring Denzel Washington, Angelina Jolie. A very good movie. It came to England because Philip's daughter, we understand, was in college here, and Philip wanted to be near her daughter, but Philip was obliged to create a cut to show to the producers back in the States. So I was contracted to be taken on as a supervising sound editor, and we also then had a dialogue editor. Before I actually got the film, I was working at Twickenham Studios. Philip was based in London, and they asked me to go for an interview, and I said, well, it was a little bit difficult because I'm working at Twickenham at the moment, and they reported this back, and Philip, bless him, came out from London to interview me at Twickenham Studios. He very kindly took me to lunch, and we had a great chat, and he agreed that I would do the film. So when I finished the project I was on, I then joined him and his American editor and his American music editor. Jerry Goldsmith, once again, was going to do the music of the picture, if I remember correctly. So Philip is one of those directors who is interested in sound. Now, there are many directors who say they're interested in sound. All they know is they don't know what they want. All they know is what they don't want when they hear it. Philip was different. Philip would sit down with me, we would run a scene, and we would talk about it. He'd say, I'd like some of this, some of that, some of the other. And he would leave me to prepare it. When I prepared it, he would then come back into the editing department and we would review it. He said, yes, I like this. Can you just change that? Can you change the other? So the idea was that we were going to do a temp dub for him to take back to show the producers in America. So I prepared the whole film, of which he then proved everything. So by the time we got into the dubbing theatre, there was nothing that would come as a surprise to him because he'd okayed everything beforehand. So we did the dub and he took it back to the States, presented it to the American producers who were absolutely delighted with what they saw and heard. And Philip, bless him, sent us a very nice message saying how well it went down. The idea was that the film was going to be finished again by a post-production facility in Los Angeles, and they re-prepared the film themselves. But feedback came back to me that during the dubbing process, Philip was asking about where's the material that we supplied, because he wasn't all that happy with what the Americans supplied. So that was a nice surprise to hear. And so the film came out and to great success. So most enjoyable experience, and interestingly enough, I think it's about 18 months later, I got a phone call from Australia saying that Philip was making a film called The Rabbit Proof Fence. There are some artists here in England who starred in the original film, but he couldn't come to London. Could I sit in and take the session? This I agreed to do. Also, another time, Philip making The Quiet American. But this time Philip was prepared to come to London to record Michael Caine and a young Vietnamese actress who'd never made a film before and never done recording before. So we set about recording. Michael came in, and Michael being Michael, totally professional, came in, did the words, and off he went. We then set about this young Vietnamese actress. She was totally bewildered. I don't think she'd even ever been out of Vietnam before, so everything was new to her. So we tried to explain to her, and showed her what needed to be done. So we spent the whole morning doing this line of dialogue, the next line of dialogue, the next line of dialogue. It then came to lunchtime. So we broke for lunch, had lunch, and then reconvened after lunch. And Philip said, let me just look at what we've done. So we did a review of what was done, and he said, okay, let's start again. So once again we went with this young Vietnamese girl. She did it again, but better this time. Not great, but acceptable to Philip. So that was quite an experience. And then I then sent the material back to back to Australia for them to work on. Another actor was Brendan Fraser. Brendan came in with a streaming cold, which of course affected his voice. So we dosed him up with this, that and the other medication that we were allowed to do. He bravely went through the process, and he did everything that was required of him. And we sent that back to Australia, and they just had to in the dubbing process, tweak his nasal effect on his dialogue, but it worked out okay at the end of the day.
I just want to mention you have received a couple of awards during your career. Do you want to just briefly mention what those are and what they're for?
Yes, Eon Productions received information from the States saying that the Bond film, Octopussy, had won a Sound Award. And we didn't know about this, so we looked into it. And there is a Guild of Sound Editors in America called the MPSE, Motion Picture Sound Editors of America. They view foreign films and give out awards for winning films, of which Octopussy was one. So that was very nice. And so an award finally arrived on our door, and for which we are very grateful. And I became an overseas member of MPSE. Now, the film was deemed a foreign award. Anything made outside of America is deemed to be foreign, even if it's English. But I mean, we weren't going to complain because we won an award. Years later, we went to win a second one for Living Daylights. Now, we were, of course, very pleased about that, to win a second one. So, Bonds so far have won an Oscar with Nolan Monster and 2 Golden Reel Awards to our knowledge. So that is quite something for an English crew to appreciate.
And it's nice that sound is appreciated in the industry, and that,
Indeed.
and that Bond is particularly, because it could be dismissed as just an action adventure series, but actually it is given its recognition.
I mean, recognition from our peers, should we say.
And just to finish off, Colin, we were saying, we've touched on how the industry has changed over the years. One of the things that we did talk about during our break was how the camaraderie has changed a little bit in terms of you get to know everybody on different departments, and where nowadays that's probably fragmented somewhat. What were some of the highlights of just sort of the day-to-day working in studios and the relationships?
The highlights was the camaraderie that we had. You'd be on a film, you had the editor, his first assistant, his second assistant, probably a trainee, effects editor, assistant effects editor, dialogue editor, assistant dialogue editor, Foley editor, assistant Foley editor, and perhaps a runner as well. So there you are, perhaps you're representing about 4 or 5, maybe even 6 different rooms, all working on the same project, with the interaction that goes on. Sometimes, we would it would come to tea time. In those days, it was a little bit more relaxed, in as much that sort of, the sound department often had a tea trolley, so we would break and go down to the tea trolley, have tea and coffee and get a sausage or a cheese roll, and then go back and carry on working. But you would often go down, perhaps if you were finishing on a job, you would go down to the tea trolley and there'd be other film crews there who were doing the similar thing, and they would say, "When are you finishing, Colin?" I'd say, "Well, a couple of weeks later." "Oh, well, so-and-so is going to need a dialogue editor next month. Give them a call." And you would often get work on the grapevine, sort of, which happened quite a bit. Not necessarily the tea trolley, but perhaps in the canteen at lunchtime, or perhaps if you're in the bar having a drink at the end of the day, you would often pick up and it was that camaraderie, and it was also you interacted with other people working in the editing departments on their movies, and we would often, perhaps like at Shepperton during the summer, lunchtime, there would be cricket on the lawn, one film playing against another film's editing team. Or my assistant, who was Indian, was a very good cook, he would organise, have a whip round amongst the editing teams, and he would do a curry or a barbecue on the lawn at lunchtime. So these days it's not the same. You may have one dialogue editor, one effects editor, one Foley editor, perhaps very rarely working in a studio, probably working at home in their front room, back room, bedroom, garage, whatever. So the only interaction they had is by Zoom, telephone, email, text. You don't have the same camaraderie. Plus the fact that you don't get a break. If you're working in your bedroom on a tight schedule, there's just you. And sort of so it just doesn't, it's just not the same. And a lot of them, when I talk about the good old days as I could refer them, they look at me with a look of envy and realise, the fun that we used to have.
Yeah, I think you were working in a golden age, not only in terms of the productions, the films that were being produced, the people involved, but also how movies were made.
Yes.
As well, and I assume you wouldn't change it for the world.
No. Another film which I thoroughly enjoy working on was a film called The Victors, written and directed by the great Carl Foreman, with an all-star cast. That was absolutely amazing, the cast on that. And the award, the great Win Ryder was the supervising sound editor on that. And Don and I were on that for I think about 3 or 4 months. There is a scene in that film that even now makes me shudder, inasmuch that it's based on a true story that took place in Sweden, where an American soldier went AWOL, and as a demonstration they decided to execute him because of that, but to demonstrate the punishment. They were taken out, he was taken out to a frozen lake, tied to a stake, and lorry loads of American soldiers were taken out to witness this execution. The priest read the last rites. Volley of shots rang out. And then Frank Sinatra starts to sing "Have a Merry Christmas." It was one of those scenes, one of those scenes that made the hair on the back of your neck stand out. The effect upon the audience was magic. Now, we'd lifted the song "Have a Merry Christmas" from a record. Carl could not use it in the final version of the film, but such was his contacts, he called up Frank saying, could we use this recording? Frank said no. He went off and did a brand new recording to use on the film.
Oh wow.
And that's what was used in the final version. But as I say, it was such a moving sequence. It really was.
It sounds like a film that everyone should see.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It was an anti-war movie. And at the very end of production, Carl asked for everybody to assemble on the set one Saturday morning. and everybody assembled the set. And Princess Margaret's then husband, Anthony Armstrong Jones, a photographer for then the Telegraph, came down and took a photograph of the whole unit, including Carl, and it was published in the colour supplement in the Sunday Telegraph. Beautiful picture, absolutely stunning picture, but it was very good, very good.
I think that's the power of cinema, isn't it? It can sort of pass on these messages and
Yes.
have a profound effect on, even if it's just one
Yes.
person.
Yes.
Well, that's probably a fantastic story to end on. Thank you very much, Colin, for spending so much of your time talking to you about your career and leading on such an interesting and lovely point.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm sure there'll be, once you've gone, there'll be about 3 or 4 other things I can remember. But no problem.
Well, thank you much indeed, Colin. It's a real privilege. Thank you.
Pleasure.